when death comes out of nowhere, it doesn't just take the person who's passed. It also takes a piece of those left behind. I was only 13 when I lost my dad, and for me, any sense of the world being a safe place just vanished. Hello? Dear viewers, this is Evelyn, who's lived a full 76 years, chatting with you live from my little corner in Lexington, Virginia. This cozy small town with its mild weather has been my haven after all the ups and downs. Today, I'm sharing a story I've kept close to my heart for over 60 years. It's a tale of pain, but also of resilience. Oh, before I dive in, I'd appreciate it if you could subscribe to this channel, like this video, and drop a comment with your name, where you live, and a bit about yourself. It could be anything, like what you enjoy doing, your favorite meal, or how many kids you have, and so on. All right, let's get started. I was born in 1949 in a small town called Lexington in Virginia, nestled at the foot of the Shenandoah Mountains. It's a place where everyone knows each other, rumors spread faster than a flood, and family secrets are locked away tight, buried in the backyard, along with other embarrassing things no one wants to bring out into the open. My dad, Benjamin, was different from the other men in town. While my friends' dads were strict and quiet, mine was always smiling, hugging, and telling stories. He worked as an accountant at the town's only bank, always in a neatly pressed suit with his thin mustache trimmed just right every morning in front of the mirror. Lily, my princess, he'd call me, even when I wasn't a little kid anymore, and I loved it. You know, I loved being his princess, especially when he'd come home from work and spin me up in the air. Even though Mum would fuss that it wasn't proper for a girl turning into a young lady. Now, my mum, Margaret. She was always the quiet type, like some invisible weight was pressing on her shoulders, keeping her from smiling much. Beautiful. Oh, absolutely. Her dark hair was always pinned up neat, and her fair skin was protected from the sun like it was her greatest treasure. But there was always this sadness in her eyes, a sadness that even Dad's antics couldn't fully chase away. Your mum had a tough life before she met me, Dad would explain when I'd ask why she was so different from my friends' mums who laughed more. We need to be patient with her, show her extra love to make up for it. And he did. Goodness, he gave so much love. He'd bring home little flowers he'd picked along the way, surprise us with breakfast on Sundays, and take us to the town park on holidays. He was always there for my school events, sitting proudly in the front row to watch me recite poetry or sing in the choir. Our house was simple but warm, on a quiet street with a little backyard where Mom grew herbs and a cherry tree that I loved when it fruited. I had my own small room, decorated with flowers that Dad had painted on the walls one rainy Sunday. The best moments of my childhood were on Friday nights. Dad would get home, we'd have dinner together, and then the three of us would head to the living room to listen to his favorite radio shows. When the show ended, he'd pick up his guitar and play while Mom and I sang along. In those times, even Mom would smile a bit, like for a few minutes she could forget the burden she carried. At school, I was a good student, not the best, but I tried my hardest to make Dad proud. Math was my weak spot, but he'd patiently sit with me at the kitchen table after dinner to help with homework. "It's okay, Lily," he'd say when I'd cry over not getting an equation. "The most important things in life we learn through struggles." Little did I know how true those words would be in the years ahead. Then, on an ordinary Tuesday in April 1963, my world came crashing down. I was in English class when the principal came to get me in the hallway with that serious look adults get when something really bad has happened. She told me Dad had fallen ill at work and was rushed to the emergency room. I ran the 5 blocks from school to the county hospital, my heart pounding like it might burst. When I got there, I saw Mom sitting on a wooden chair in the hallway. Her eyes were distant, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the rosary beads she always carried in her purse. "Mum, where's Dad? What's going on?" I asked, tears streaming down my face. She didn't answer, and she didn't need to. That silence, the way she looked at me like she didn't recognize me for a second, told me everything I needed to know. "It was his heart," she finally whispered. "It happened so fast. By the time they got him here, he was having a massive heart attack. That's what the doctor called it." A time bomb no one knew was ticking in Dad's chest. He was only 42, healthy, never smoked, and only had a small glass of wine at Sunday lunch with the family. The days that followed were a blur of faces, unhelpful hugs, empty words from well-meaning folks. A wake in our living room, as was the custom back then, and a funeral that nearly the whole town attended because Dad was so loved. And then the silence. A deafening silence that settled over our house, like they'd buried all the laughter, songs, and joy he brought right along with him. Mom, who was already quiet, now seemed like a ghost. She'd move around the house, but she wasn't really there. She went about her chores mechanically, only speaking when necessary. At night, I'd hear her softly crying in her room. During the day, she'd stare out the window for hours, like she was waiting to see Dad come home with his big smile and open arms to spin me around. I was hurting terribly myself. I felt this hole in my chest, like something vital had been ripped out of me. I had nightmares almost every night, waking up, calling for him. At school, I couldn't focus. My grades slipped, and I didn't want to play with friends. "She'll get over it," I overheard an aunt tell Mom. "Kids forget things quickly, but how could I forget? How could I move on when the person who loved me most, who made me feel safe and special, was gone without even a goodbye?" Still, life goes on in its cruel way, pulling us forward even when we want to stand still. The bills kept coming. We needed groceries. And life demanded we keep going even when we're broken inside. That's when the financial troubles started hitting. Dad had a small life insurance policy that was about to run out. Mom had never worked outside the home, had no skills, and only a grade school education. She began cleaning houses for wealthier families in town, doing laundry for others, and selling baked goods she made early in the mornings. I tried to help as much as I could. At 13, I started babysitting after school for families who could pay a little for it. During vacations, I'd help out at the corner bakery, stocking shelves and sweeping floors. I'd hand over every penny I earned to Mom. and she'd tuck it away in a cookie jar on top of the kitchen cabinet. Even so, it was tough. Our house was rented, and without Dad's paycheck, we couldn't keep up. After 3 months of late payments, we had to move out and ended up in a tiny place in the backyard of an elderly lady who charged less rent in exchange for us looking after her. Seeing Mom, who was already so sad, sink even deeper into quiet despair broke my heart. She lost weight, hardly ate, worked herself to exhaustion, and I'd find her asleep at the kitchen table on top of the ironing pile with the iron still warm beside her. Life had turned into a constant struggle just to get by. I missed Dad, missed his love and protection. But I also missed the security he provided, the certainty we'd have food on the table the next day, that we wouldn't get evicted, and that there'd be medicine if we got sick. Right in our most vulnerable moment, that's when Robert showed up, and with him came promises of brighter days. But what followed was the worst trap we could have fallen into. Edward Harris walked into our lives on a Sunday after church service. Mom and I were getting ready to leave, her in the black dress she hadn't taken off since Dad's funeral. I was in hand-me-down clothes that were already too tight from a neighbour. He approached us, hat in hand, with a polite smile. "Mrs. Margaret, I'm Edward Harris. I worked at the bank with your husband. I offer my condolences for Benjamin. He was a good man." Mom thanked him with a nod, but didn't really look at him. She was like that with everyone, distant and wrapped up in her own grief. But Robert didn't give up easily. He offered us a ride home, chatting the whole way, sharing stories about Dad that I hadn't heard before, asking how we were managing, and offering help. "If you need anything, just call," he said as we pulled up to Mrs. Wilson's gate, where we were staying. "I live on Willow Lane, number 18. Just knock." I found it odd. Dad had worked at the bank for over 10 years. I knew everyone there. Why had Dad never mentioned him? Why hadn't he ever brought him over for coffee, like with his other colleagues? But Mom didn't seem to notice anything off. In fact, for the first time in months, I saw a spark of life in her eyes as she said goodbye to him. A tiny flicker, barely there. But it gave me hope that maybe, just maybe, she could start being herself again. Robert started showing up almost every day. He'd bring leftovers from his place, offer to fix things around the house, and help me with my math homework. He was polite, well-mannered, always dressed neatly and smelling fresh. He was probably around 35 with a touch of grey in his hair, around the temples. His dark eyes would light up when he smiled. "He's a good man," Mrs. Wilson commented one afternoon as I helped her braid her thin hair. "Clearly, he's taken a shine to your mum, dear." I felt a knot in my chest. Interested in my mum. Why? Dad had only been gone less than 6 months. How could I even think about another man so soon? But the truth is, with Robert around so much, Mum started to change. It wasn't a big change. She was still quiet, still had that sadness in her eyes. But she began dressing a little nicer, occasionally wearing something other than black, brushing her hair more carefully, and most importantly, talking more and smiling lightly at his jokes, showing interest in things beyond her exhausting daily chores. I knew I should be happy for her, but something inside me objected. It felt like by letting Robert in, We were betraying Dad's memory. Like we were saying, he could be replaced. That the hole he left could be filled by someone else. Your dad would want us to be happy. Lily, Mum said to me one night after Robert left, it was the first real talk we'd had in months. He wouldn't want us spending the rest of our lives crying. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was being selfish and childish. After all, she was still young, not even 40, and our life was so hard. Robert had a good job at the bank, his own house, and could provide the security we'd lost. Still, I couldn't feel comfortable around him. There was something in Robert's eyes, something that showed up when Mum wasn't looking, when it was just him and me in the living room while she finished up in the kitchen. A strange, calculating look that made me shiver. "You'll see, Lily," he'd say gently, putting his hand on my knee in a way that made me pull back. "I'll take good care of you both, especially you." I tried talking to Mum about it, about how uneasy it made me feel, but she wouldn't listen. "Of course you're confused, sweetie. That's normal. You loved your dad so much. No one can replace him. But Robert just wants to help. He wants the best for us." 3 months after Robert entered our lives, he proposed to Mom. It was on a Sunday after lunch that he brought over roast chicken from the bakery, rice, beans, even a bottle of wine. He got down on one knee in our little living room, pulled out a small box with a simple ring, and popped the question. Mom cried, saying it was too soon, that she wasn't sure she was ready. But Robert insisted, talking about love, his care, and how he wanted to give us a better life. "You could move into my house next week," he said, like a yes was a sure thing. "There's plenty of room, a room just for Lily, a big backyard." When Mom looked at me, silently asking for my okay, I swallowed hard and forced a smile. Who was I to stop her from finding happiness again? Who was I to make us both keep struggling when an easier way was right there? They got married in a simple ceremony at the courthouse. No party, no guests. Besides me and 2 witnesses Robert arranged. Mom wore a light blue dress, her first coloured one since Dad passed. She didn't glow like a bride should, but there was a cautious hope in her eyes that I hadn't seen in a long time. The next day, we moved into Robert's house. It was a nice place, much bigger than anywhere we'd lived before. 3 bedrooms, a large living room, a kitchen with new cabinets, and even a yard with fruit trees. My room was at the end of the hall, far from theirs, which gave me some privacy I'd never had. The first few weeks went smoothly. Robert left for work early and came home in the evenings. We'd eat dinner together and chat about the day. He'd ask about school, my friends, and seemed genuinely interested. Mom was more lively, cooking fancy meals, keeping the house spotless, like she wanted to prove she deserved this second chance. I still felt uneasy, but I tried telling myself it was just a matter of time, of adjusting. After all, he was treating us well. He'd paid off my overdue school fees, bought me new supplies, and even gave me a bike I'd always wanted, but my parents could never afford. About a month after the wedding, things started to change. At first, it was subtle. Then it crept in so slowly you hardly noticed. First, the criticisms about the food. "Too salty," he'd say, and push his plate away. Or, That's not how you season meat, Margaret? Then came complaints about the house's cleanliness. Look at the dust on this furniture. What kind of housewife are you? Mom, wanting to please him, worked even harder. She'd clean the house from top to bottom every day. Try new recipes. Spend hours in front of the mirror getting ready before he got home. But it never seemed enough. The criticisms turned on me too. My grades, even though they'd improved since I started going back regularly, were never good enough. My way of talking was too sassy for a girl. My clothes were either too revealing or sloppy, depending on his mood. And then he started drinking. At first, just a glass of whiskey after dinner, then 2, then the whole bottle. And with the drinking came the real Robert, the one hidden behind the mask of a kind, decent man. The first time he hit Mom was over a button, a simple button on his shirt that had come loose and she hadn't sewn back on yet. We were at dinner when he noticed and suddenly exploded, flipping the table, smashing dishes, grabbing her by the hair. I ran to protect her, but he shoved me hard against the wall. I stood there, stunned, watching as he dragged her into the bedroom, her screams going from please to silence. Silence. The next morning, he acted like nothing happened. He ate breakfast, kissed her forehead. She was trying her best to cover the bruises around her eyes and wished me a good day at school. When I got home, Mom was cleaning as usual, moving mechanically with a blank stare. Mom, we have to get out of here, I whispered, afraid he might hear, even though he was at work. He'll do it again. It'll get worse. She just shook her head, not meeting my eyes. It was just this once, Lily. He drank too much and lost control. He's apologized and promised it won't happen again. But of course it did. The next week, it was because dinner was late. Another time, he thought she was flirting with the mailman. There was always an excuse, a reason for the violence. And the next day, always apologies, promises, sometimes even flowers or gifts. Mom, who was already fragile, grew even more so. The little spark of life that had returned to her eyes when she met Robert was fading fast, leaving only fear and resignation. As for me, he kept his distance in a calculated way. He'd criticize and belittle me verbally, sometimes push or slap me. But nothing compared to what he did to Mom. I was just the pesky stepdaughter, a constant reminder that Mom had a life before him, that she'd loved another man before him. Around the same time, I started noticing a different look from him. When I'd come out of the bathroom, or change in my room with the door not fully shut, or bend down to pick something up off the floor. That look made me feel dirty, exposed, and vulnerable. I started locking myself in my room whenever I could, only showering when he wasn't home, and wearing baggy clothes to hide my changing body. The whole town started talking. In a small place like ours, secrets don't stay hidden long. People saw the bruises Mom couldn't quite cover, noticed how she'd become a shadow of the woman she used to be. They saw me walking with my head down, scared and withdrawn, so different from the cheerful girl I was before. But no one did anything. You don't get involved in married folks' fights. They'd shrug. Like a man beating his wife in their own home was just normal, something private and acceptable. Even my teachers at school saw my puffy eyes from crying too much, my dropping grades, and how I was pulling away. But they just looked the other way. It was easier that way, less complicated, less risky. Gradually, I realized a harsh truth. We were on our own in this. No one was coming to save us. If we wanted to escape, we'd have to find the strength within ourselves. I tried so many times to convince Mom to leave. We could go back to Mrs. Wilson's or find relatives in other cities. Start fresh somewhere far from him. But she always had reasons. We have no money. Lily. Where would we go? He'd find us. It'd be worse. Sometimes he'd be good to us. Every marriage has its issues, sweetie. That last excuse made me angriest. What kind of issues include black eyes and broken ribs? What kind of husband locks his wife in the bathroom, trembling in fear at the sound of the front door? It wasn't a marriage with problems. It was a prison, a slow death sentence. And then, when I was 14, it happened. The day that changed everything and made me realize I had to act fast before it was too late. The day Robert didn't just show his true colors to Mom, but to me too. Everything shifted on a Friday. I remember it like it was yesterday. Every detail is etched in my memory, even after over 6 decades. It was the day of my math test, my toughest subject. I'd studied hard, stayed up late reviewing, but when I saw the questions on the exam, my mind just froze. The fear of disappointing everyone, the pressure I put on myself, the dread of going home with a bad grade and facing Robert's reaction, it all made it impossible to concentrate. I turned in the test with hardly anything done. I left school with a heavy heart, that awful feeling following me all the way home. I even thought about not going back, about running away somewhere. But what would a 14-year-old girl do with no money, no ID, and no one to help? I got home, and Mom immediately knew something was wrong. What happened? Honey? She asked gently as I dropped my backpack in the kitchen corner. The math test, I admitted, tears welling up. I could barely do any of it. I'm going to get a bad grade. She hugged me, a rare gesture at that point. It'll be okay, she whispered in my ear. Don't say anything to Robert today. He's had a rough day at work and came home on edge. We'll talk about it calmly tomorrow and figure out what to do. I agreed, relieved to delay the inevitable. We ate dinner in silence while Robert downed glass after glass, his face getting redder, his eyes darker. I helped Mom clear the table, wash the dishes, and then quietly went to my room, thankful that for another day, he hadn't noticed me. I was doing my English homework when I heard the noise, the unmistakable crash of breaking glass, followed by Mum's screams, then the sound of a body hitting the floor. Scream louder, please. I thought desperately. I was frozen for a few seconds, my heart racing, pencil still in hand. It was always like this. He'd start with Mom, and if I stepped in, it only made things worse. She'd begged me to stay in my room and not get involved. But this time was different. Amid her screams, I heard my name. Lily has nothing to do with this. Please, Robert, leave her alone. A chill ran down my spine. Why was she bringing me up? What had happened? I slowly opened my door, my heart pounding so hard it felt like it might jump out of my chest. From where I stood, I could see part of the living room. Mom was on the floor, blood trickling from her forehead, her hands up in a futile attempt to protect herself. Robert was standing there, holding a piece of paper and waving it in her face. "Did you know about this? Did you?" he yelled, his voice hoarse from the booze. "This brat got a 0 on her test. After all I've done for you two. Is this how you thank me?" My blood ran cold. The teacher must have called about the test results. Or maybe a classmate told their parents. And it got back to Robert at the bar or the bank. In a small town, news spreads faster than wind. "She's tried her best." "Robert," Mum pleaded. "Math's always been hard for her. Benjamin used to say that." Mentioning Dad's name was like striking a match near gasoline. Robert's face turned red with rage, his eyes bulging, a vein popping on his forehead. "Don't you dare mention that man in my house!" he shouted, slapping her so hard she fell again. I couldn't hold back. I ran out of my hiding spot, throwing myself in front of Mom, facing Robert for the first time. "Leave her alone. It's my fault. Not hers." For a moment, he looked surprised at my boldness. Then a strange smile crossed his face, one that made me shiver. "Well, look at that. The little princess decides to stand up for her mom. How noble. But you're right. It's your fault. And do you know what happens to disobedient girls who get 0s on tests?" He took a step toward me, swaying a bit from the alcohol. Instinctively, I backed away. "Robert, please." Mum tried to get up, grabbing at his leg. "She's just a child." He kicked her away like she was an annoying bug. "A child? Take a closer look. Margaret. She's turning into a woman, and she needs to learn to respect the man of the house." The way he said it, the way his eyes roamed over my body, made me feel naked and exposed. That's when I knew what was coming, and terror paralyzed me. "Mom," I whispered, my eyes begging her to do something, anything. She looked at me, then at Robert, and I saw something die in her eyes, a total surrender, an acceptance of the inevitable. She bowed her head, unable to face him, unable to protect her daughter. "Go to your room, Margaret," Robert ordered. "I'll teach this one a lesson she'll never forget." What horrified me most was that Mom obeyed. She struggled to her feet, gave me one last look with eyes full of apology but no intention to help, and left the living room, shutting the bedroom door behind her. Right then, I realized I was completely alone. The person who should have protected me at all costs had chosen to protect herself first. Out of fear. Out of weakness. Because years of abuse had broken something fundamental inside her. What happened in the hours that followed is something I still find hard to talk about even after decades. The physical pain was awful, of course, but the pain of betrayal was worse. The realization that my own mother had abandoned me when I needed her most. Robert raped me that night, not once, but multiple times. He used my body like it was an object, a tool to vent his anger, frustration, and twisted desires. And all the while, on the other side of the wall, Mum stayed silent. She knew what was happening, heard my screams, my pleas, but she chose to do nothing. When it was finally over, when he passed out from the booze and his own cruelty, I dragged myself to the bathroom. I turned on the shower and sat on the cold floor, letting the water run over my bruised body as if it could wash away the blood, sweat, shame, disgust, and despair. I stayed there. I don't know for how long, minutes or hours. Time lost all meaning. All I know is that at some point, as the water turned cold, I made a decision. I wasn't spending another night in that house. I'd rather die on the streets than let him use me again. I struggled to get dressed, choosing baggy clothes to hide the bruises and avoid drawing attention. I grabbed my backpack, emptied it of books, and packed only the essentials: a change of clothes, a toothbrush, the only photo I had of Dad, and some coins I'd saved since I started babysitting. Before leaving, I went to Mum's bedroom door. I hesitated, my hand on the knob. Part of me wanted to go in, wake her up, beg her one last time to come with me, to choose her daughter over that monster she'd married. But another part, the part that had been brutally forged that night and couldn't be undone, knew it was pointless. She'd made her choice, and I had to make mine. I left the house without looking back. In the chilly dawn of a sleeping town, I had no idea where to go, what to do, or how to survive. I just knew anywhere would be better than there, that any uncertain future was better than that horror. I walked aimlessly for hours, tears drying on my face as the sky lightened. As the sun began to rise, I found myself at the town bus station. It was a small spot with just a few routes connecting our town to bigger places. I counted my money. It wasn't much, just enough for a ticket to the nearest city. But it was a start, a way to escape, and a chance, however slim. I went into the station and looked at the schedule. The first bus left in half an hour for Roanoke, a bigger city where I could get lost, where no one knew me, and where Robert would have a hard time finding me if he even tried. I bought the ticket with shaking hands, always fearing someone might recognize me, might ask why a 14-year-old girl was alone at the bus station at dawn with a backpack and puffy eyes from crying. But no one asked, no one cared. Just like no one had cared about the obvious signs of abuse in our home for months. That indifference that had hurt me before was now my ally. I sat in the last seat on the nearly empty bus, huddled by the window. And as the engine roared to life and we started moving, I felt a strange mix of relief and fear. I was escaping hell. Yes. But where would I go? What would become of me? At that moment, I didn't know that bus ride was just the beginning of a much longer journey, that I'd be running not just from Robert, but from the memories, the pain, and the betrayal, that I'd have to build a whole new life on my own at an age when most girls are still playing with dolls. I didn't know it would take years before I could sleep through the night without nightmares, that the sound of a breaking bottle would make me tremble for decades, that I'd struggle to trust people, especially men, for the rest of my life. But I also didn't know about my own strength, my resilience, my ability to turn that horrific pain into something useful, something that might one day help others. As the bus pulled away from the town I'd known all my life, I looked out the window one last time. The sun was rising, painting the sky in pinks and golds. A new day was dawning, and for me, a new life too. That was the worst night of my life. But it was also the night I discovered I was on my own in this world, and somehow had to find a way forward. I arrived in Roanoke feeling completely lost. A 14-year-old small-town girl in a big city, knowing no one and with nowhere to go. As I stepped off the bus at the station, the noise, the crowds, everything overwhelmed me. There were moments I almost regretted running away, but then I'd remember the night before, the terror from Robert's hands, Mum's silent complicity, and I knew there was no turning back. I had to keep going, no matter how scary it was. I spent my first day wandering the city, backpack in tow, trying not to look as desperate as I felt. I used a little money to buy bread from a bakery and carefully saved the rest. It was all I had in the world. As night fell, the fear grew. Where would I sleep? How would I stay safe? Eventually, I found a bench in a park, half hidden by bushes. I knew it wasn't safe. But what other choice did I have? I curled up there, clutching my backpack to my chest, trying to doze off but jumping at every sound. That's how it went for 3 days. Wandering during the day, sleeping in hidden spots at night, eating as little as possible to make my money last. I washed up in public restrooms, trying to keep myself as presentable as I could, but it was getting harder. On the 4th day, a woman approached me in the park. I was sitting on a bench, staring into space, hungry and exhausted. She stopped in front of me, studied me for a moment, then asked, "How many days have you been out here on the streets?" Girl, I thought about lying, about saying I was just waiting for someone, that I had a home and family. But I was too tired from pretending, too desperate for help. So the truth spilled out before I could stop it. 4 days. She nodded, like she already knew. "And where are you from?" "Lexington. Running from something." I looked down, unable to answer. "How do you explain the unexplainable to a stranger?" She sighed and sat beside me. "You don't have to tell me if you don't want to, but you can't keep going like this. You'll end up with some bad folks or the cops. Do you know what they do with minors they find on the streets? They send them back to their parents." Horror must have shown on my face because she quickly added, "Don't worry, I'm not reporting you. I'm just saying you need help." Her name was Mrs. Dorothy. She was a retired teacher, a widow living alone in a small house nearby. She'd been watching me in the park for 2 days, she said, noticing I wasn't your typical street kid, that something serious had landed me in this situation. "Come with me," she offered. "You can clean up, have a proper meal, sleep in a real bed, and then we'll figure out what to do." Trusting a stranger was risky, I knew, but what did I have to lose if she meant harm? I could run again. I was getting good at that. Mrs. Dorothy's house was simple but cozy, filled with books and plants. She showed me to the bathroom, gave me clean towels, and even lent me an old dress from her daughter who lived far away. I took my first shower in days, washed my hair, and felt almost human again. Afterward, Mrs. Dorothy served homemade soup and bread, and I ate like I hadn't breathed between bites. Only after I finished, with a full belly and a clean body, did the tears come. I cried like I hadn't allowed myself to before, sobbing until my whole body shook, releasing not just the stress of the last few days, but all the built-up pain from the months prior. Mrs. Dorothy didn't ask questions. She just waited for me to calm down, handed me a handkerchief, and said simply, When you're ready to talk, I'll be here to listen." That night, I slept in a real bed for the first time since I ran away, in the room that had been her daughter's, with fresh-smelling sheets and a window overlooking a backyard with an apple tree and a cherry tree. I slept like a rock, too exhausted to dream. The next morning, I woke up disoriented, not sure where I was, in a panic. I thought I was back at Robert's, that it had all been a dream, the escape, the bus, the days on the streets. Then I heard pots clanging in the kitchen, smelled fresh coffee, and remembered. I was at Mrs. Dorothy's. I was safe for now. Over breakfast, she didn't pry. She talked about the weather, her garden, a book she was reading, as if having a teenage runaway at her table was the most natural thing in the world. It was only later, as we washed dishes together, I washed and she dried, that I started opening up. The words came out slowly at first, hesitantly, then they poured out in an unstoppable flow. And I told her about Dad's death, Mum's depression, Robert coming into our lives, and finally, my voice barely above a whisper, about that night and what he did to me, and how Mum had shut herself in the bedroom, choosing not to see or help. Mrs. Dorothy listened in silence, her jaw tightening now and then to show her anger. When I finished, when there was nothing left to say, she just hugged me tight. It was the kind of motherly hug I hadn't felt since Dad died. "You're not going back there," she said, not as a suggestion, but as a fact. "Not as long as I'm alive." In the days that followed, Mrs. Dorothy and I fell into a routine. She'd leave early for her tutoring gigs with neighborhood kids. That's how she supplemented her retirement. I'd stay home, help with cleaning, and learn to cook simple meals in the evenings after dinner. She'd tutor me in subjects like English, math, history, science, all the things I'd missed at school. She was a tough but patient teacher, knowing how to explain things in a way that made them easy and fun. "You're smart, Evelyn," she'd often tell me. "You can't waste that mind. Education is the one thing no one can take from you. Remember that." After 2 weeks with her, we had the conversation I'd been dreading since day one. "We need to sort out your situation," she said. "Dear, you can't keep living like a ghost. You need to get back to school, get your papers in order, and officially exist." Panic hit me hard. "But if we do that, they'll send me back to him." She shook her head. "Not necessarily. There are other options, but we'll need legal help." The next day, she took me to a place called Child Protective Services. It was a modest house converted into an office where volunteer lawyers handled cases like mine kids and teens in vulnerable situations. The lawyer who helped us, Mr. Richard, was a kind young man. He listened intently to my story, took notes, and asked questions to clarify details. When I was done, he took a deep breath and explained our options. "Ideally, we'd file a formal complaint against your stepfather. Based on what you've reported, there's enough for charges of statutory rape, along with the prior physical abuse." I swallowed hard. The thought of facing Robert in court, of seeing him again, terrified me. But Mr. Richard, sensing my discomfort, continued. "I get that this is tough for you right now. The minimum we need is to make sure you're not forced to go back to that house. He explained we'd petition for emancipation. Normally, it's granted from age 16 in specific cases, but with reports of severe abuse, we might get an exception. Meanwhile, he said, we'll register Mrs. Dorothy as your temporary guardian. That would let you enroll in school, access health services, and officially exist without the risk of being returned to your parents. It was a long process, and there were many painful moments. I had to repeat my story to social workers, psychologists, and a juvenile court judge. I went through medical exams to prove the abuse. I faced pitying looks, disbelief, and sometimes judgment. Mom was notified about the proceedings. She didn't attend any hearings, didn't contest my emancipation request, and showed no interest in getting me back. Meanwhile, Robert tried to intervene. Not out of concern for me, I knew that, but out of fear of the legal consequences of what he'd done. Luckily, the evidence against him was strong, and the judge ruled in my favor. By 15, I was officially emancipated, a rare exception granted due to the extreme circumstances and the tireless support from Mrs. Dorothy and Mr. Richard. Once my legal situation was settled, I finally got to go back to school. I entered the first year of high school, a bit behind my peers. I'd missed nearly a year because of all the turmoil. At first, it was tough. I felt out of place, different, marked in some invisible but noticeable way by the trauma I'd been through. But my thirst for learning, to make up for lost time, spoke volumes. I threw myself into my studies with an intensity that surprised even my teachers. Math, which had always been my weakness, became a personal challenge I refused to back down from. I'd study extra hours, redo assignments 2 or 3 times, and ask for help when I needed it. You don't have to be the best at everything. Evelyn, Mrs. Dorothy would say, worried about my obsession with perfection. Just do your best. But I knew I had to excel. It was the only way to secure a different future. One where I wasn't dependent on anyone, where I'd never be vulnerable again. Besides studying, I started a part-time job at a bookstore near home. The owner, Mr. George, was a friend of Mrs. Dorothy's and agreed to hire me even though I was underage, as long as it didn't interfere with school. The pay wasn't much, but it gave me a sense of independence I'd never known. I could buy my own things, contribute to household expenses, and even save a little each month for the future. The bookstore became my second home. In my downtime, I'd devour all kinds of books, novels, biographies, history, science. It was like each page I read took me a step further from the frightened girl who'd fled Lexington at dawn with just a backpack and a broken heart, bringing me closer to the woman I wanted to be. It was at that bookstore that I met Professor Eugene. He taught history at the local university and was a regular customer, always hunting for rare books on American history. We started chatting about books, then history, then everything. He noticed my curiosity and interest, so he began lending me books from his personal library. "You should think about college, Lily," he said one day after a long discussion about the Civil War. "You have a brilliant mind that shouldn't go to waste." College, I'd never even considered it. People like me, with no family and no resources, just scraping by day to day, didn't go to college. At least, that's what I thought. He emphasized that it was possible, with scholarships and support programs. It would be tough, but not impossible, and every effort would be worth it. That conversation planted a seed that would bloom years later. But at the time, I focused on finishing high school, on being self-reliant, building a life that, if not truly happy, was at least safe and stable. The years passed. I graduated high school with top grades and kept working at the bookstore, now full-time. Mrs. Dorothy, who was getting older when she took me in, started having health issues like arthritis, high blood pressure, and declining vision, which meant she couldn't tutor anymore. Our roles slowly reversed. Now, I was the one caring for her, handling the shopping, cooking, and doctor visits. It wasn't a burden. It was an honor to repay some of what she'd given me. It was because of her that I finally decided to apply to college. I wanted her to see me graduate, to make her proud before it was too late. I studied harder than ever to prepare for entrance exams, all while working, keeping house, and helping Mrs. Dorothy with her meds and appointments. In 1969, at 20, I got into the history department at James Madison University. I was the first in my family, if I could still call those in Lexington that, to go beyond high school. When I got the acceptance letter, Mrs. Dorothy cried, hugged me, and said she always knew I'd make it. "You've flown, Lily," she said, using the nickname only she still used. "You've flown with broken wings, but you've flown anyway." And she was right. Somehow, despite everything, I'd learned to fly. It wasn't a perfect flight, plenty of pain and scars, but it was my flight, earned through tears, sweat, and determination I didn't know I had. The girl who'd run away at dawn with just a backpack and a shattered heart was becoming the woman I always wanted to be: free, strong, and in control of my own destiny. College opened up a whole new world for me. After years in the protective bubble Mrs. Dorothy and I had created, I was suddenly exposed to people, ideas, and experiences I'd never imagined. It was both terrifying and liberating. The first few months were tough, balancing my job at the bookstore, caring for Mrs. Dorothy, who was getting frailer, and the demands of school felt almost impossible. There were nights I cried from exhaustion, wondering if I'd made the right choice, if someone like me could really handle college. But with each obstacle I overcame, each test I aced, and each compliment from a professor, I felt stronger, more capable. I started making friends, not many, since I was still guarded and slow to trust, but a few good ones who didn't care about my vague past and accepted me as I was. Among them was Claire, a literature major I met at the library. She was outgoing, chatty, and always laughing. She was my opposite in so many ways, which is probably why we clicked. She pulled me out of my shell, reminding me that the world still had joy, that not everything was struggle and sorrow. It was Claire who convinced me to go to my first college party. I resisted and made up 1,000 excuses. But she was persistent until I gave in, mostly to get her to stop, rather than because I wanted to. "You'll like it, Lily," she assured me, "and if you don't, we'll leave right away. I just want you to live a little, breathe, and meet new people." The party was at a frat house near campus. Loud music, colored lights, young people laughing, dancing, drinking. and flirting. It was a scene totally foreign to me. Someone who'd spent recent years buried in books and quiet responsibility. I sat in a corner, holding a soda, just watching that strange and kinda scary world around me. That's when he walked over. He was tall and lanky, with brown hair falling over his eyes, and a shy smile that didn't quite fit his impressive height. "Is this your first time at the student union party?" he asked. When I nodded, he added, "I'm not a huge fan of these either. I only came because my roommate's having a birthday and he insisted." His name was Daniel, a third-year engineering student. We chatted for hours that night, first at the party, then at a late-night diner, and finally strolling through the quiet campus under a starry sky. We talked about books, music, and our dreams for the future. He didn't ask about my past, and I didn't offer to share. It felt like we had an unspoken understanding that what mattered was who we were right then, not what we'd left behind. When we said goodbye near dawn, he asked for my phone number. I gave him the bookstore's number. Since that was the only one I had, I figured he'd never call. Guys like him, smart, handsome, from good families don't usually go for someone as complicated as me. But he did call, the next day, and then the day after. We started meeting up after classes, studying in the library, and taking walks in the park on weekends. I kept telling myself it was just a friendship, nothing more. After all, what did I really know about relationships? The only examples I had were my mum's painful marriage to Robert, and before that, a few years with my dad glamorized by a kid's memories. How could I trust any man after what I'd been through? Daniel respected my boundaries, my silences, and my withdrawals. He never pushed or demanded more than I could give. When I finally opened up to him about my past, not everything, just enough for him to understand the scars, he just held my hand and said, "Thank you for trusting me enough to share that." In that moment, I realized I was falling in love, and it terrified me. "You deserve to be happy, Lily," Mrs. Dorothy told me when I confided my fears. "Don't let that monster keep controlling your life, even from afar. That would just give him a win he doesn't deserve." She was right. I knew it. But saying it is easier than doing it. The fear had woven itself into every part of me. It wasn't something I could just uproot and throw away. Daniel understood that better than I did. With endless patience, he helped untangle the knots of my trauma, showing me that not all men are like Robert, that real love doesn't hurt, humiliate, or destroy. Our first kiss came almost 6 months after we met. We were sitting on the campus lawn, studying for finals. Suddenly, he closed his book, looked at me with those gentle eyes, and asked if he could kiss me. The simple fact that he asked and waited for my permission showed the huge difference between him and Robert. "Okay," I replied, and it was like a floodgate opened inside me, not just for love, but for the possibility of a life beyond just surviving, beyond the constant struggle, beyond the fear. We graduated in 1973. I majored in history, and he in engineering. Mrs. Dorothy, though she was getting frail, made it to the ceremony. She sat in the front row, wearing her nicest dress, and clapped with tears in her eyes as I received my diploma. "Your mum is so proud of you, my girl," she said afterward. And no one questioned it, because that's exactly who I was defined by heart, not blood. Daniel got a job offer in Lexington, Virginia, at a growing engineering firm with good pay and future prospects. He asked me to come with him, not as a friend or girlfriend, but as his wife. His proposal came on a simple evening, just the two of us on Mrs. Dorothy's porch, gazing at the stars. He said he wanted to build a life with me. Evelyn, a life of partnership, respect, and love. If I was ready, that is. Was I ready? I wasn't sure. Part of me was still scared, still waiting for the kind mask to slip and reveal another Robert. But another part, the one that had grown and learned to trust again, knew that Daniel was different, that he deserved a chance, and so did I. "Okay," I answered, for the second time, giving him permission that would change my life, but with one condition. "Mrs. Dorothy comes with us? I can't leave her behind." He didn't hesitate for a second. "Of course. She's family to you now. She's family to me too." We got married in 1974 in a small but joyful ceremony. It was just Mrs. Dorothy, Claire, a few college friends, and some colleagues from the bookstore where I'd worked for years. Mr. George, the bookstore owner, kindly walked me down the aisle. He said, "If your dad were here, he'd be so proud of the woman you've become." Moving to Lexington was a fresh start, with a new house, a new town, and new jobs. I landed a teaching position at a private school, checking off another dream. And with Mrs. Dorothy in the living room, we felt like we'd built our own little family tied together not by blood, but by love and mutual respect. The early years of marriage were all about learning how to live with someone, share space and habits, and love in a healthy way. Daniel had to learn how to handle my panic moments, the nightmares that still woke me up in a sweat at night. I had to learn not to expect the worst from him during disagreements, not to flinch when he reached for something on a high shelf, and not to fear being hit. In 1976, I found out I was pregnant. Daniel and Mrs. Gisont, Dorothy, were thrilled, but I had mixed feelings. Of course, there was happiness, but also terror. What if I didn't know how to be a mom? What if I repeated my mom's mistakes? What if I couldn't protect my child because I hadn't been protected, Mrs. Dorothy reassured me that I'd be a great mother precisely because I knew what not to do. The scars we carry can either break us or teach us lessons. You've chosen to learn from them. Our daughter, Sophia, was born in January 1977. She was a healthy baby with rosy cheeks and a tuft of dark hair like mine. When I held her for the first time, I felt an intense love that almost hurt. Along with that love came a strong resolve this child would never know the pain I'd endured, would never feel abandoned, betrayed, or alone in the world. 2 years later, Ethan arrived, so different from his sister with blonde hair like his dad, calm where she was fidgety, thoughtful where she was chatty, making our perfect quartet, rounded out to a quintet with Mrs. Dorothy. She was getting up in years, but still had the energy to tell stories, teach songs, and be the grandma our kids didn't share blood with. Life went on with the usual joys and challenges. Like any family, Daniel got promoted. I became a coordinator at the school, We bought a bigger house with a yard for the kids to play in. Then, in 1982, the past came knocking. A letter from Lexington announced that my mum had passed away from a heart attack. She'd be buried that week. I stared at that paper for hours, not sure how to feel. I hadn't been in touch with her since the night I left home. She never tried to find me, never objected to me being free, and never showed any regret for what she'd allowed. "Do you want to go to the funeral?" Daniel asked gently. I thought about it for a while. "No," I finally answered. Not out of anger or resentment, but because there was nothing there for me. My mum had died to me that night when she shut the bedroom door. All that was left was an empty shell. He understood. He always did. The letter also mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that Robert had died years earlier in 1975 in a car accident. He'd been drunk and crashed into a tree. No one else was hurt. I felt an odd sense of relief knowing that. Not joy. I never wished death on anyone, even him, but a definite end. Like a dark chapter had finally closed for good. I thought about it for a while. "No," I finally answered. Not out of anger or resentment, but because there was nothing there for me. My mom had died to me that night when she shut the bedroom door. All that was left was an empty shell. He understood. He always did. The letter also mentioned, almost as an afterthought, that Robert had died years earlier in 1975 in a car accident. He'd been drunk and crashed into a tree. No one else was hurt. I felt an odd sense of relief knowing that. Not joy. I never wished death on anyone. Even him, but a definite end. Like a dark chapter had finally closed for good. Years passed, and the kids grew up. Sophia graduated in medicine, and Ethan did too. Both got married and gave us 5 wonderful grandkids. The joy of our later years. Mrs. Dorothy lived to 97 sharp until the end, and passed away peacefully on an autumn afternoon in 1998. Daniel and I grew old together, watching our love mature like fine wine. He retired, and I kept teaching because I enjoyed it, not because I had to. We traveled a bit, seeing places I never imagined I'd visit as that scared girl fleeing into a cold dawn. Today, at 76 looking back, I see a life I never thought I'd have. Full of pain and scars, yes, some that never fully fade, but also brimming with love, joy, and accomplishments. That broken girl from Lexington who thought she'd never heal, built a full life, a loving family, and a legacy of protection and care. Not in spite of the trauma, but by turning it into strength, purpose, and love. I never went back to Lexington after we left. I didn't want to. Some bridges don't need rebuilding, but I forgave not for those who never asked for it, but for myself. Because holding on to hate is too heavy a burden to carry through life. The silent promise I made to my dad at the bus stop before heading to Cedar Point has been fulfilled. I survived. I became strong. I built a life he'd be proud of. And most importantly, I broke the cycle. My kids, my grandkids, they've never seen the horrors I did. They've grown and will grow up in love, respect, and safety. That's my greatest victory, my biggest legacy. Dear viewers, if this story touches your heart, please like and subscribe to the channel. Every subscription gives me the strength to keep sharing these memories, which aren't always easy to relive, but might help others going through tough times. Don't forget to enter the $500 giveaway. I'd love to know who the winner is. Warm hugs from Mrs. Evelyn, who taught us that the scars we carry don't define us. It's how we choose to handle them. Always remember, the best revenge against those who try to destroy you is to live a full, happy, and meaningful life. That's what I did, and that's what I wish for each of you.